and welcome to the Untitled Anarchist Seagull channel's slightly delayed Friday night stream on this last night that I have the place to myself. I have some new reactionaries to be bowling bounces at tonight, but as I wait for people to notice the link, get started with some just Geoguessr, as usual. I've leveled up quite a bit, so I've been playing a lot of it on various streams, and okay, this looks sort of North American. 253, yeah, North American number. 253 area code is okay. Washington by Tacoma. Okay, let's see what we've got here. So we're in some sort of suburban, perhaps even exurban residential area in Washington State. Okay, now we've got a main street. Hopefully we're going to get some street names. New Life Samoan Assembly of God. Now, usually these church names are kind of East M Street. These church names tend to be kind of useless because so many churches have just the exact same names. But that seems like the one that could narrow it down a little bit. Tacoma Streets Initiative. Okay, that's confirmation. We are indeed in Tacoma. .56th and M. .56th Street. Okay, there we go. East 56th and East M. East L, East K. Wait, there's East N. Elite International Auto Repair. We just saw that. Yay, there we go. That was easy. .31st. 128th. 72nd, come on. 38th, 56th. $267 yards, $49.99. Good start to everything. And let me see. This looks pretty North American too. Can we get on top of that? Get on top of that, that overpass there, and we may... It looks like there was a sign right there. But hell, I'm not... Oh, hold on. Vasa. We are not in North America. We are in... I'm pretty sure that's Vasa as in Finland. Yeah, that's Finland. 715 to Vasa. Whatever it is, it's the road crossing the 715 to Vasa. Turku, Vasa. 717. 724. 715. How far from... Okay. Yeah, I think we got it. Jesus. I'm having a streak of really easy Geoguessr clues. Vasa. 715. 1198 yards. 49.96. It's rare that I do that well in Finland. Okay, and this looks North American as fuck. Let me see. Hakea Place, Hakea Street. Yeah, those are palm trees. Okay, this is making me think maybe Hawaii. We've been going to Hawaii a lot lately. Can't make that one out. Yeah, okay. This is going to give us some speed limit 25. Okay, we are in a U.S. jurisdiction. Rather attractive as well. Are you gonna give me a fucking street name by any chance? Besides Hakea or Hakea? Leia. Yeah, we're in Hawaii. I mean, that's Hawaiian. Ho'oele Anonui. Yeah. I mean, that doesn't help me much. I didn't really know my way around Hawaii, but, I know what Hawaiian looks like because it looks a lot like Maori. And Rapa Nui. Kaupea. Te Haulani. Ahuna. Okay. I mean, the trouble is, I didn't really know my way around Hawaii, so I'm not sure. I mean, these street names don't mean much to me other than that they clearly tell me what territory in general we are in. Halepuna and what is this large main street? Anonui. Anonui. That looks like a street large enough that it would probably show up without a huge amount of zoom. Hello, Apudite. How are you? Okay. Let's just try Honolulu. Kapiolani. King Street. Punchbowl Street. Lanakila. Anonui. Or after Anonui. Well, welcome to the stream. How'd you find me? Always curious. Since basically nobody's ever heard of me. Keanu. Palolo. Harding, Pahua, Kilauea. Montserrat. Interesting spelling of Montserrat, though. Dole Street, Metcalf Street, Manoa, Lowry. Let's see. Let's see if we can get something a little bit more definitive. Oh! Well, welcome back then. Kayamo. Ah, bloody hell. Give me something more than this to go on. Waiahu. RKCA Rec Center. Ah, yes. Vahahi. Ah, bloody dead end. Okay, well, we're gonna just say somewhere in Hawaii. 11 miles off, 49.39. Doing pretty well. Every single score so far has been over 4,900. Out of a maximum of 5,000. Solo Sijitu. That looks like Malay or Indonesian. Would be my first guess. And we'll be going to play to Indonesia and Malaysia quite a lot with Geoguessr lately. Seems like it gets on some sort of... gets into certain patterns. Like, I'd never actually had a single time in Hawaii until like this past week. Now Geoguessr's had me there 3 times. Sumatra Utara Lombang Sutandoli Sitompul Selatan. Yes, Sumatra Utara. Okay, that it would be Indonesia. Handy, we're already in the general neighborhood. Kalimantan. Okay. Maluku, Sumatra. Lombang, Tapanuli, Selatan. Don't actually really understand much of Indonesian. Just a handful of words, really. But I know what it looks like. Dunhill, Peringatan. Oh, Dejarum. I used to smoke those a very long time ago. Roda Baru. Baru means new. Beyond that, I don't really know. Okay, we're someplace in Sumatra, though. $33.52. 371 miles. For Indonesia, that's not bad. Indonesia is hard. Oh, this is Britain. This has to be Britain. These pavements, these estates. This is Britain. Yep. And even this style of street sign. It's only a question of where now in Britain, or humps for 440 yards. It's only in English. Okay, we are not in Wales. Barrow Road. Oh, 01162 area code. UK phone info. Tilton, Tugby, Kibworth. Okay, so it's around Leicester. Okay. So that's a start. Flanders Close. Yeah, we've got a co-op. Yeah, this... Rollins Academy. Sawson Street, Loughborough Road. Quorn, Lime Tree, Danish, right? Okay, let's just move up to Leicestershire. It'll be someplace in this general area. And we must yet find out exactly where. Rollins Inspiring Learning. Well, one would hope so, since it's a fucking school. 127 bus. And a pub. Vintage Inns. Healthier air for Leicester. Okay. Oh, Arriva. Oh, those poor Leicestershirians. Arriva. Oh, they're just absolute shit. One of the best things to happen in Wales in the past couple of years is that Arriva no longer control the trains. The Clock Tower, Leicester Market, Curve Theatre. Jimmy's Killer Prawns. Very District 9, that. Chai Pani, Chai Wala. Pub called the White Hart. That is a very popular pub name. I know a pub by that name down in Buckfast Lee in Devon. That's absolutely lovely. National Space Center. Your supermarket. Ooh, let's see. Saffron Street, Connacht. Morrison's. Raw Dykes Road. Okay. I love that street name, and love that street name. Oh, hello. Hello, Erica. We were just observing that Leicester has a street called Raw Dykes Road. But alas, the place we're looking for on Geoguessr is not on Raw Dykes Road. White Hart. Linford Cottage. Visual answers. Come on, give me a bloody street name. Health Center. I mean, we know it's by a co-op. Wait, the White Hart and the White Horse just down the street from each other? Filbert Street Car Park. New Purnima of Mombasa. Halal fish and chips. Himalaya Tandoori. God, and now I'm really... This is making me hungry for a pho. Hookah Garden. Jimmy's Killer Prawns. All very District 9. Hey, I'm getting all the best District 9 references out of my Geoguessr travels. Okay, fuck it. We are 7 miles away, 49.58. 23,244 points. Not bad. Another 116 XP. Now, I've added some new reactionary bullshit artists to our reaction fodder section. I mean, last time we saw the inimitable combination of Caleb Muppet and Jimmy Dork discussing BreadTube Serves Imperialism, a book that I watched the entire thing, and my impression is he hadn't actually read any of it, and he also hadn't even heard of any of the people it was talking about. Okay. We already did what can Jurassic Park teach us about socialism. It teaches us that Caleb Muppet, in addition to not being any kind of socialist, doesn't appear to actually understand what Jurassic Park was about. Let's see. Cancel. Oh, well. Oh, yes, and we already saw Ariel Scarcella declare herself to have been at the forefront of gay rights, and also completely not know what Stonewall was. Hello. Welcome. Okay. Former Trump administration official confirms that China is determined to destroy the U.S. Okay. Okay. Any of these? Anyone have a particular... Anyone's interest piqued by any of these so far? Anyone have a particular preference? I mean... I see we've got, Down with Which. Yeah, that China is determined to destroy the US one. See, yeah, I don't actually think that's the case. I think that the thing about having at one point actually... Oh, okay. The thing about having at one point had more power globally, the most, like, being the empire with the most global reach of any in history, and then, eventually peaking, as has happened. I mean, the U.S. really kind of peaked in about 1945, 1946, when you get down to it, is that any competition has to be looked at as a threat of annihilation. I mean, the U.S. claims there's actually a fucking order, or national security decision directive, something like that, that claims that Venezuela is an existential threat to the United States. Similar statements have been made officially about Nicaragua. Flood Troll structures? Oh. It's like, yeah, that took me a second. Okay, let's get this audio output back up. Oh, there's also Chinese trolls are sowing dissent in the U.S. They control American elites and government. But, I mean, if they already control the elite and the government, then why would they want dissent in the first place? Why would they want dissent against the elite and government that they control? That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Then okay. Well, we've got time to do more. Well, we'll see. So, China determined to destroy the U.S. We'll start with that one. Paying your boy back in Bitcoin? That's money? No.
Let me test you guys.
That's
okay?
bullshit. Okay, whose is this? Okay, Peter Navarro. Let's do a little bit of due diligence on this guy. What's his deal? Okay. Director of Trade, Manufacturing Policy, National Defense Production Act Policy Coordinator. So, in short, he's largely responsible for the complete lack of seriously using the Defense Production Act to do anything about COVID. Death by China. This sounds like a very measured treatment of U.S.-China relations right there. He's called for increasing the size of the American manufacturing sector. Okay, opponent of NAFTA, which, I mean, NAFTA sucks shit, but a lot of the people who oppose NAFTA also suck shit. He publicly clashed with Anthony Fauci, director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, as, oh, he's one of the hydroxychloroquine dickheads. And yeah, the U.S., I mean, in terms of U.S. global power, the U.S. did peak in 1940 because the U.S. had basically no meaningful competition. I mean, not 1940, 1945, 1946, right after the war, because the British Empire was basically done for at that point. I mean, it was already collapsing. The European colonial empires were also on the way out. The Soviet Union was devastated, and it was going to take about 20 years just to recover from the war. And the U.S. had basically no economic or military competition to speak of pretty much anywhere as a result. And it was always going to be downhill from there. I mean, there's just no way it can not be downhill when you already basically control practically everything that there is to control. And it was downhill. I mean, look at the major colonial wars that the U.S. either lost or did not really decisively win. I mean, yeah. So, yeah, U.S. global power really peaked around the end of World War II. It was always going to be downhill from there because eventually there was going to be fucking a reconstruction in Europe, and it wasn't going to be the only industrial power that wasn't completely wrecked from the war forever. Because people rebuild. So, okay.
Oh boy. Because I always had trouble with the libertarians in the administration. How do you guys feel about tariffs on China?
And, well, give me a little bit more detail. Like,
So in the In Trump Time book, there's a great scene where I do go mano a mano with Chris Wallace on his Sunday show.
Oh,
right?
good for you.
And it's like we're in each other's face, and he goes, "What's the problem with China?" I go, and it just pops out of my head because it's Sunday, right? It's biblical. I go, the 7 deadly sins, right?
Okay. Anyone want to lay odds on what this is going to be?
So I go, okay, so here's the problem. It's even get all seven. It's always a chore. Okay. Okay, you start with the intellectual property theft to the tune of $500 billion a year. You got forced technology transfer, which is if you want to go and do business in China, you got to hand over your technology, right? Totally.
Yeah. I mean, not a bad idea because I mean the thing is, okay, he talks about forced technology transfer, but actually, the entire imperialist structure that he was one of the sort of leading managers of for a time was based on forced technology transfer. I mean, from the very beginning, you look at the British textile industry only managed to eclipse India because they reverse engineered Indian technologies and then made it illegal for India to use those technologies themselves. And they did all that stuff all the time. The entire bioprospecting sector is all about forced technology transfer as well in the form of intellectual property. So, yeah. I mean, the fact that a formerly colonized country, is actually requiring, you know, requiring some kind of technology transfer in order to give other, foreign capital access to their markets and their resources and their workers and all that. I mean, you can't. There's a lot of stuff that I don't like about how China is run. That isn't one of them. That's actually not a bad idea.
Unfair trade. You've got the constant cyber hacking, both of personal, individual.
Oh, because the U.S. would never cyber hack anyone except, like, literally the entire U.S. population and pretty much everyone else.
For their credit card, whatever, but also businesses, right? Stealing their IP in other form. You've got what's called dumping, which is sending product below cost into markets as a way.
Sort of like what the U.S. did to Haiti with chicken parts in the 1990s. That completely destroyed the one sector of the Haitian economy that was actually kind of working out.
Way of pushing the domestic producers out and grabbing hold of those markets. You have China's state-owned enterprises. I'm up to 5 now, right?
Yeah,
See, these are the national champions they send out with the full power of the state to go out and do battle, and why it's China building our subway systems instead of American companies.
Wait. I think we missed something there because okay. Unless what he's saying is that keeping private capital out of infrastructure companies makes them work better. Is that what he's going for?
Currency manipulation,
Yep.
which is like China lowers the value of their currency, which makes their exports here cheaper and our exports to them more expensive, so our trade deficit goes up.
Oh, yeah, exactly. I mean, exactly, Erica. I mean, the Marshall Plan and the whole Grand Area Strategy was based on rebuilding a German-centric economic sphere in continental Europe, a Japan-centric economic sphere in Asia, and then treating all of the rest of the world as what they called service areas, where they were just where the goal was to get access to their labor and their natural resources, while at the same time ensuring that they would complement but not compete with that's a quote, their U.S. industry. Yeah, I mean.
And then there's the 7, is the killing of Americans with deadly fentanyl, and that's both a health crisis.
Well, wait, the killing of Americans with deadly fentanyl? I mean, what does he mean? Is he saying that there's something wrong with the fentanyl, or is he just saying fentanyl itself is deadly? Which, I mean, like pretty much any opiate, yeah, I mean, you have to be fucking careful with it. It is possible to OD.
As well as an economic thing, because a lot of the people who die from fentanyl are
What does this have to do with China,
working
though?
age manufacturing
Blue collar,
blue collar workers. Okay, so the libertarian, the traditional libertarian view is that, well, if China wants to sell us cheap goods, we should just benefit from them. And what I'm going is, no. It's like, that's a form of economic aggression. If you take it as like a snapshot and you go into Walmart and stuff's cheap, that's cool. Okay, that's what. But if you play it like as a movie over time and all your jobs go offshore and your wages are driven down.
Well, yeah, except that is, in fact, the way that every once in a while there is some talk of some of this manufacturing coming back from China, and it's specifically because the wages are so fucking low at this point that sometimes the shipping cost is actually making China more expensive. Yeah, the whole fentanyl thing, I mean, I don't... This is the first I've heard anyone try to blame that shit on China, but yeah, it is totally overblown. With this bullshit where cops claim that they, like, OD'd on fentanyl by being in the same building with the stuff. You know, solid fentanyl that they just kind of touched a little bit and supposedly got totally strung out on, which literally isn't possible.
And people go to the unemployment line, and workers wind up committing suicide because they don't have jobs. That's a serious thing. So I get...
Oh, yeah, okay, but that's not China specifically. That is an entire economic policy that is part of a general rubric that's called capitalism. That is all about pushing the wages down in order to keep the profits up.
Back, and like in the In Trump Time book, I identify this set of what I called the Wall Street transactionalists, like Mnuchin at Treasury, Kudlow at the National Economic Council, Mulvaney, big libertarian. It's like I try to do like buy American policies or China tariffs, and these guys freak out. So I'll throw it back to you guys, libertarian. Do you do tariffs on China to protect yourself?
Well, there's two different libertarians now. You've got
Oh, God, where are we going with this?
the Mises Caucus, and you've got the establishment, old school type libertarians, and they disagree on a lot of things.
Yeah.
Okay. First of all, I mean, what he's just talking about is neoliberalism.
So I think the Mises guys are like pro borders, right?
Yeah, very much so. I
Yeah.
think so.
Yeah, I mean, they're totally inconsistent. They don't want the state, except they also want the state. The state should not exist except to the extent that it's hurting working people, and the whole thing is based on the idea. Well, yeah, and aside from that, I mean, this is the country where, I mean, not that this is actually really a unique thing about the U.S., but where, like, governments, like Biden just did this, bragged about kicking people off of UI, bragged about kicking people off unemployment, as if that was a good thing. Like, as if taking people off of this absolute pittance that they get as unemployment insurance because they can't find a viable job. Immediately, well, I mean, it is a good thing for some people. It drives wages down. But, I mean, that then gets but it's not a good thing for most people.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So they're probably going to say we have to protect American workers in America, and then I think their view is more like within the area that we can protect, we have libertarian values and views on how things are run.
Yeah.
But we recognize, outside of the borders. So I don't know if that's exactly their view, but I would say my view is similar to that. Like, I don't want China ripping off American workers using economic coercion.
Yes, only American capital should rip off American workers. American workers have the right to be screwed over by their own kind. That's right. That's the finally, Tim Pool's got a principle. American exploitation for American workers.
And warfare to try and destroy this country. So everything within the borders, I believe in, we're very libertarian, individual liberties, individual rights, civil rights, etc. And then when it comes to international trade and stuff, we must protect the people in our community.
Here's an interesting stat for you folks. Our trade deficit with China is roughly equivalent to the People's Liberation Army defense budget.
Huh.
So, and by the way,
Which is, I mean, and we're supposed to imagine that this is some huge amount, and I mean, from any of our individual perspectives, yeah, but it's nowhere near the U.S. military budget. Like, let me see. Chinese PRC military budget. What do we know about that? Okay, about 230.16 billion this year. That is what it's going up to, according to CNBC. Now, the U.S. military budget, how much was it? What is it, like? I think it's like 3 times that. 801 billion. 801 billion. So, like, literally more than 3 times what we're the Chinese military budget that we're supposed to be so fucking scared of.
Hey, it's Tuesday, and Friday is not just Friday. It is Black Friday. And that's when everybody's going to be going to the big box, baby, Walmart, Target, whatever. And a lot of that stuff they're going to buy when they pick up that made in China stuff is actually going to be plows into swords, plowshares into swords, because that stuff is that money or trade deficit goes to fund all of their weapons. And
well, I mean, it goes to fund a lot of things. I mean, since a lot of this stuff is coming from, since the whole setup of China's status as a cheap labor manufacturing platform for foreign capital, is that they skim what they skim goes into the budget as a whole as well. So yeah, it's paying for the Chinese military, it's paying for all sorts of other shit. It's paying probably to some extent for the fact that they count their COVID dead in fewer digits than we do, despite having 3 times our population. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Herrenvolk democracy, except, yeah.
What drives me nuts is you ask at the beginning who I am. It's like the way I met Donald Trump, and I talk about the In Trump Time book because there was some confusion there. I wrote a trilogy of China books, right? 2006, The Coming China Wars. 2011, The Death by China book and film. And then those were economic based. And then 2015, Crouching Tiger, which was...
Oh, well, that's such an original title, too.
Was the rise of the Chinese military. So, like, in 2015, I write this book and say, yeah, China's developing these hypersonic missiles that can kill us with nuclear weapons, right? Okay.
Well, wait, okay. I mean, so what you're saying is that China's the first country to have nuclear weapons? So, I mean, like, why would anyone on this planet, especially somebody who is not really entirely on side with the U.S. on everything, why would anyone possibly want nuclear weapons? I mean, the U.S. doesn't have nuclear weapons. I mean, the U.S., I mean, what they do, the military, they just kind of hand out chocolates. Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so that's like 6 years ago. And so China, just a couple of weeks ago, they fly a hypersonic plane around in low orbit, which is capable of bristling with weapons, and everybody's going...
So, wait, so it's a plane that is capable of having weapons on it? Well, capable of bristling with weapons. So I guess it's capable of what? Doing, like, fucking hairdressing with weapons? Bristling somebody? Yeah, so what? I mean, so this is new to you? You worked for the U.S. government, and the idea of a country testing out their fucking high-tech aerospace hardware in a very visible way is new to you?
Oh, wow, that's surprising. Oh, my gosh.
Well, why is it fucking surprising? What, that they have airplanes? That their airplanes are high-tech when, like, they are one of the big fucking tech manufacturing platforms on the planet? Like, what's the surprising bit? That they have an air force? Why?
No, it's not. It's like, in 2006...
okay, good. No, I mean, at least we have that. I was a bit worried that...
I predicted in the Coming China Wars that China would create a global pandemic because of the way they handled the viruses, and it was based.
Yeah, I mean, because of course the way we handle the viruses is just fucking top notch. Yeah, I mean the U.S. has all kinds of fucking high-tech aerospace hardware that is capable of bristling with weapons. I mean, and then it also has what is it called? The F-35 that like can barely fly, and that it just sort of requires U.S. client states to buy up as a sign of like fealty, even though the thing's a piece of shit and everybody fucking knows it. But yeah,
based on my research of how SARS-1 came about. My point here is that China is an existential threat. You got Joe Biden say it's just simply a competitor. And part of what
well, the thing is, the U.S. calls its competitors existential threats. That's what the U.S. does. That's the whole fucking scam. The U.S. will be like, fucking Hades elected a government we don't like. They're an existential threat. They could wipe us out. How is left to the imagination? Magic probably comes into it. But, I mean, yeah, calling everything a fucking existential threat. I mean, could the U.S. possibly be an existential threat for anyone? I mean, the U.S., after all, has 3 times the budget of China. Admittedly, China has airplanes. They have developed airplanes. And they might even have the nuclears. Which, of course, we would never use nuclear weapons on anyone. Except, like, we fucking casually talk about annihilating entire countries with them. Like, our officials, like, regularly, casually talk about just annihilating entire countries with nuclear weapons. But, wow, China... Why would any country that might end up at odds with Washington possibly want those kinds of weapons?
I've been trying to do, and what President Trump was absolutely transformative about, was to raise people's awareness, as they used to say in the 60s, about the threat of communist China, the Chinese Communist Party coming after us. And they're coming.
What? First of all, raise whose awareness? And second of all, come after us? What did you, like... Yeah, why the fuck is the Chinese Communist Party going to come after us? I don't owe them any dues. I never signed up in the first place. Why? They're not coming after me. I mean, I don't know, maybe... this guy, this is the kind of guy who Tim Pool...
after us,
needs.
And it is.
So what do the tariffs do? How will that help?
So the way tariffs work, if you have a country like China that is dumping product in or stealing or whatever.
Yeah, you mean this stuff that the U.S. does all the fucking time?
The tariffs, first and foremost, offset the advantage that they've gotten from the unfair trade. So that's your first best, right? But what we were also trying to do with China was to get them to the bargaining table. So in some sense, the tariffs were a penalty for things like intellectual property theft or currency manipulation. So it was fascinating.
Yeah, I know. They're bent on world domination. It's like... Everybody's bent on world domination except the U.S. It's just so fascinating to listen to this sort of fear-mongering. It's like, I don't even particularly like how the way China is run or any of this stuff, but he is systematically picking out the least objectionable things that China is doing. He is systematically picking out the things that actually make a lot of sense. It's like when Vosh debated Caleb Muppet, and like systematically accused him of being fascist for the most innocuous things he has to say, rather than the actual fascist stuff, because Vosh literally does not know what fascism is. He thinks it is when the state controls capitalism. That is his definition. That is word for word his fucking definition. Ah, yes. General Bat Guano, was it? Turgidson.
The first chapter of the book, I call it the Red Wedding chapter, in homage to Game of Thrones. But we're sitting there in the East
Wow, that's so clever. I just got what he did. Cause they're commos. Red.
Wing, and the president's about to sign this skinny trade deal where we're supposed to deal with this economic aggression. And
Okay, but what exactly? Somebody actually had to decide to move their production to China in the first place. Well, I mean, if it's economic aggression, then it's economic aggression from U.S. capital, since they're the ones who've decided that that's advantageous. Jack D. Ripper. It's been so long since I saw it. I remember the names, but not which one is which.
It's like I'm fighting the Wall Street transactionalists because all they were concerned is if China buys some more soybeans or whatever. They weren't focused on the core problem. But we had this strategy. It was called dragon in a pot. Like, think about this.
Wow, he's great at naming things. Right, okay, yes. Buck Turgidson was George C. Scott's character. That's right. He's just so clever with the names. I mean, this guy... just pure dank ponage.
It's like we knew that there would be resistance to tariffs initially among a certain segment of the public. But to get people to accept them, what we did, this was brilliant, President Trump, he got China to enter.
This guy, the whole way he talks, reminds me of, like, I read in pubs. Sometimes I'll go to a pub alone and I will just read. And... sometimes some guy will see the title of the book. It's always a guy. See the title of the book I'm reading. And decide that they have to start talking to me about whatever's in the book. They're like, tell me about it. They don't know anything about it. Sometimes they literally can't read the book because they don't speak the language the fucking book's in. But they gotta tell me. And this is like the entire manner of every single... This guy is a composite. A fucking identikit of those guys. Because it always ends up in some just random bullshit. Like, they just kind of talk themselves into these weird corners. And, yeah.
Into negotiations. Every time China did something in those negotiations which was unfair, we'd raise the tariffs. And that allowed us, over time, to steadily... increase the tariff.
Okay, and what happened when the U.S. did something that was unfair, or does the U.S. never do anything unfair?
Tariffs to over $100 billion of tariffs. And in a second term, I'll say this for the record, and I've talked many times with the president about this, we would have completely raised tariffs on everything to 100% and began to do what I believe has to be done, which is decouple from communist China. Because every time China makes another dollar off the United States or Europe.
When China makes a dollar, Trump makes a dime. That's why I shit on company time.
Or whatever, it's able to fuel both its military machine, but also the war China's conducting, like through the so-called Belt and Road Initiative. I don't know if you guys have ever talked about that, but
it's funny. I mean, okay. Now, I am as okay. So we're gonna just call, leaving aside every single bit of reasonable skepticism and criticism that can be around this initiative. It's interesting how when the U.S. is doing a war internationally, the infrastructure ends up being completely pulverized. And what he's calling a war here is like literally building infrastructure. And there's all sorts of criticisms one can have of it, but calling it a fucking war? I mean, it will be the first war that actually leaves the infrastructure in a better state than what it was beforehand.
It's so it's basically the colonization of Africa, Latin America.
Yeah, that's our fucking job. That's our fucking job.
Kazakhstan and everything like that. I mean, they've got a strategy, and the advantage they have over us
is that people don't fucking hate them as much as they hate us. I mean, that's what gets me. I mean, there's this annoying idea that comes around a lot where it's like, you know, these North American and Western European leftists are they're unique in what a hard time they give the United States and NATO. They won't give the fucking United States any benefit of the doubt. Like, and it's like, and people say this, and then you'll get like these sort of, and you'll get dickheads who are like, oh yeah, we'll have to take that on board. That's a fair call out. When you look, and you look, it's like, have you ever talked to leftists from the global south, from the countries that have actually seen the business end of the way the U.S. does? They really fucking hate the U.S. Like, I mean, the disconnect is huge that there's this idea. But yeah, so it's not all that surprising. They have the advantage of the fact that they have not spent decades without a break flattening entire regions. They have the advantage that they have not actually gone in and completely ruined the regions these countries are in. So yeah, that's very unfair that it's really unfair that China forced the US to just leave this fucking blood trail in its wake that has led people to look at pretty much anyone other than the US as an improvement. That's really unfair that China forced the US to do that.
As a democracy, is that we change governments and officials every 4 years, right? And these guys that I would see, I sat, Saka, the G20 across from Xi Jinping and his merry band of apparatchiks. Same thing in Buenos Aires, many times.
Yeah, because I mean, it's a weird thing that China has. They have bureaucrats. They have officials who do technocratic things and make decisions. Which, I mean, we wouldn't never have anything like that here. Yeah, exactly. I mean, the U.S. has fucking AFRICOM, and okay, I'm noticing the date. This is from late 2021. So, they of course this would not come up because it hadn't happened yet. The U.S. literally just fucking invaded Somalia. Germany and France have been in a war against Mali that nobody fucking talks about because they claim that they're actually like they're defending the government of Mali against the population there. Yeah, internal aggression, I think it's called. Adlai Stevenson seems to come to mind there. I mean, these
I went
people.
to Beijing. My point here is that these guys across the table had been there for years, and they will be there for years.
Yeah.
And I'll be gone. And instead now in Biden land, they've got a bunch of appeasers and people who. Here's the way they do this, Tim. It's like there's money pots and honey pots. Okay.
What gets me about this is, I mean, I'm not that they never. Yeah, exactly. I mean, France never stopped fucking around with any of their former colonies. I mean, shortly before the U.S. Canadian French coup that got rid of Aristide the second time, he had raised the issue of France paying back the $21 billion they extorted from Haiti as the price of the freedom of the formerly enslaved people there. And, I mean, like, fucking West Africa, a lot of West Africa is paying a colonial tax to France right now. But yeah, it's, I mean, China is totally the only people who are talking about colonizing Africa. I mean, Europe has just left Africa. Yeah, of course they have. I mean, the internal conflict was probably in some ways created by the fact that they colonized the place in the first place. A lot of these internal conflicts are. I mean, but what I guess his point is, Europe had this hands-off policy with Africa. They would never, ever dream of fucking with people in Africa. Whereas China just goes right in there, and they're building fucking roads, man. Game over, man. I mean, it's like, the lack of introspection, I understand that it is required in order to be a person in his position. In addition to the fact that he sounds like one of these pub assholes I was talking about earlier, which apparently also works. Yeah, but like, to talk about this, it's all based, on just this tacit assumption. It doesn't even have to be argued that the U.S. just owns this shit. Yeah. Yeah, without having an encyclopedic knowledge of every conflict in Africa, I would not be the least bit surprised.
Okay, the honeypot is Eric Swalwell in California, right? Yes. Sleeping his way up and down the coast with the Chinese spies. I joked he had like STDs, like spy transmitted diseases, right? That's the.
Ooh, that's clever. This guy in his wordplay, it is pog as fuck. This guy is the wordplay fucking master. What gets me about this is, like, literally the only explanation that these people can come up with for why the U.S. would have this relationship with China, where on the one hand the U.S. fearmongers about China, on the other hand Wall Street relies on China for pretty much all the high-tech manufacturing that can't be done elsewhere. And the only thing they can come up with is some weird Chinese conspiracy that they won't even get specific about, because I think they realize how silly it sounds the minute you try to.
Honeypot, right? But the money pots are much more insidious, because what China will do with government officials is, like, they'll give them like trips to Beijing, or they'll put them in a think tank, they'll give them grants at universities, and
so pretty standard shit.
These people become beholden to the Chinese, and then
the U.S. does this exact thing. In fact, one of the ways that the CIA recruits fucking agents in place, and has for a very long time, is that you get all these upper class people from students from other countries, whether it's like Canada or Chile or Russia or anywhere, who decide to, like, pursue a degree at one of the top tier elite finishing schools like Yale or whatever, and that at some point they get at some point some of them get approached if they look like they might be interested. I mean, this is standard shit. Pretty much every country has a version of this.
They wind up like Jake Sullivan is the national security advisor, right? I mean, this is crazy stuff.
Well, he'll just do a business deal.
Oh, it's Luke Turdkowski.
Dealings with Biden's sons, and I agree with your point when it comes to decoupling, especially from China's pharma industry, which the United States is heavily reliant on. But I think previously what you were describing was globalization instead of libertarianism, because when we
that's because globalization, what is referred to as globalization, is simply the elimination of all of the every bit of, like, development, promotion, or protectionist measures in countries the U.S. wants to have unfettered access to the resources of. Basically, you can easily say that those two things are the same thing, because it's all about how they, like, the countries the U.S. wants shit out of, should not have any kind of state subsidies or any kind of protective tariffs or any of that shit. Whereas the U.S. gets to have them, and of course the entire U.S. industry, every dynamic sector of the U.S. industry, either is in some way or another subsidized directly or indirectly by the states. Yeah. The U.S. and Europe never stop fucking around and propping up moderately authoritarian regimes, or sometimes not so moderately, I'd say, and destroying local ecosystems for the benefit of the world market. Yeah, I mean, they're doing it all the time. But, yeah, the problem is that China might want to get in on it in what looks like it might be a somewhat less destructive version.
You look at what China's doing, they're treating China like a conduit for a multinational corporate takeover of the world. And
well, that's called capitalism. It's a conduit for money. See, what they've worked out is that they can get the money by having the manufacturing done in China, and in the end, they're paying less than they would have to pay workers here, except the margin gets smaller each time because real wages in this country have been flatlining for ages.
And people are using China as a slave factory to produce the goods. But this was all started under Henry Kissinger, who literally took manufacturing jobs from the United States, deindustrialized.
He literally took them? Like, how's that work? How do you literally take a job?
And then took all the jobs to China, and now China now has taken a lot of workforce, a lot of economic opportunities from the American people. And
far be it from me to suggest that Henry Kissinger is innocent of anything, but my recollection is that this happened well after his watch. I'm sure that he was keen on it. I mean, the whole Nixon and China thing was, really, so much of it actually depended on Dungism. I mean, you really could not have actually done this in China pre-Deng Xiaoping, because they had not actually decided to go for the economic model that made it possible. So it seems like something Kissinger would approve of, but I don't think he was personally involved in it when he was still at state with Nixon.
Obviously, if someone steals from you, that's not libertarianism. There should be consequences, and you should have a right to contract with who you want to contract with, and we shouldn't be...
Wait, there should be... okay. So if somebody steals from you, that's not libertarianism. There should be consequences. Consequences from what exactly?
Contracting with people who are stealing from us. So that libertarian kind of idea still holds strong to me, but because of the multinational corporations having so much power and influence by...
do you think that might be something to do with the fact that there is no state restriction or no restriction of any kind preventing them from doing that? I mean, could it be something to do with the natural tendency of capitalists to accumulate and form monopolies and edge the competition out? This guy, it's great because he keeps on talking about consequences, things that would obviously be like speed run if we did things according to his ideology, that have actually been slowed down by the piss weak model of regulation that exists to a certain extent. And he's like, well, if we completely removed all restrictions on doing this stuff, it would be so much better. He literally, it's like fascinating. I don't think that he has actually given any thought to any of this. It's like Jimmy Dore talking about bread tube serves imperialism.
Out the U.S. government, we don't have libertarianism. We don't even have capitalism. We have socialism for the super rich, which is orchestrated by...
Well, no, what you're talking about is the fact that the state benefits capitalists. Which, of course, in capitalism, the state does, because the capitalists are the people who have the power, because they're the ones that control all the shit everybody else needs to live.
Elites like Kissinger.
I take a really good, short but nice shot at Henry. Yes, he's the dumbest, one of the dumb smart guys you meet along the way, who's made millions and millions and millions of dollars from that. The funny thing about these corporations, though, and General Electric is the poster child for this. All of these American corporations who thought they could go over to China, offshore all the jobs and things like that, wound up getting destroyed over there They got stripped of their technology, and they wound up having
their technology. I mean, GE is a wonderful example because the U.S. underwrites GE's R&D. GE would basically have no R&D to speak of apart from really just fucking around at the margins of existing tech. If it weren't for U.S. government contracts, particularly military contracts, and the guaranteed price overruns and all the other shit that are built in there, specifically in order to encourage high-tech waste production.
competitors over there who were Chinese, and then if you look like GE, it's like it hit its peak. It was at its apex. Then the moment it started to go over to China, that was the end of that corporation.
Really? GE, okay. Let's find out. Okay, I feel like I would have heard if GE went under. Yes. No, it doesn't look like they're... Why is General Electric failing? Poor performance and declining revenues, but they haven't gone under. It isn't the end of GE, because the thing is, GE can basically practically gets a blank check from the U.S. federal government because they're a military contractor.
Again, I'm old enough to remember when GE was the most important and powerful corporation in the world. Today, it's like China just took that.
Thanks for checking out this segment from the
China just took that. The Junta Revolucionaria de Gobierno in where? Moderately. That's where moderately authoritarian comes from. Okay, and which one? Are we talking Guatemala? Wait, are you sure about that? Because I don't think Costa Rica has ever actually had a junta. I think that is like the one country in Latin America that has had uninterrupted civilian rule. Yeah, El Salvador sounds more right. It's like Costa Rica, the one thing... That's the one thing about... I mean, it's also right-wing civilian rule, which is why the U.S. hasn't fucked with them. But, I mean, Costa Rica, I don't think they have ever actually, in like the modern history of the country, had an interruption to their electoral system. From woke leftist to free thinker. This is my last night having the place to myself, which is why it's after 1 a.m. and I'm still doing shit. Considering taking a quick break and then maybe having another one of these wonderful videos, possibly another Pim Tool one, possibly, let's see, we have from woke leftist to free thinker, how Amala got red pilled. That should be fun. Guess or mess, Margaret Thatcher. Okay. Oh, PragerU on how to think objectively. I'm sure that'll be fascinating. Or we could keep on with the Tim Pool China theme and look at how Chinese trolls are controlling American elites and government and then sowing dissent against them. But I'm just going to take a break for a couple of minutes. I will be right back. And let me know if you have any preferences there. Since 1948, they've had uninterrupted civilian rule in Costa Rica. Okay, I knew it was some extremely long time by Latin American standards, but I wasn't sure the exact length because it's been a long time since I read anything about Costa Rica. Okay. So, any particular thoughts on... Okay, let's see. We've got... Wholesome talk with Vosh about drama, VTubers, and streamer safety with the pro-Israel streamer that he platformed a while back. Because he just doesn't stand for anything good. Yeah, that's something that Haiti did as well, actually, after the Duvalier dynasty finally came to an end, and they elected Aristide, much to the displeasure of Washington. One of the things they did was disband the army and the national police. Okay. Probably not do the entirety of this thing because it's quite long, and I don't know if I can last that long, but we do some of it. I'm sure it's going to be very wholesome.
I do have a feeling that if I ever went to one of those places, I would be chilling, even behind a mask. I'd be chilling, and then I'd hear from a distance, "Is that f***ing Bosch?" And I would just hear really heavy footsteps, getting louder and louder and closer, and that would be the last thing I would ever hear.
What places? I mean, this is a really weird place to be beginning this. Well, I mean, if you sort of jumble it up, it kind of works. Hold on one more second.
Or see.
Hello.
Hello.
How's gaming?
Doing great, but there is one problem.
Oh no.
Well, I recently entered a call with a person who thinks that Israeli blood must be preserved through the ethnic or something to this effect, through the ethnic exclusion of Palestinian people.
Okay, so a Zionist.
I'm honestly shaking and crying and shitting right now. So what happened?
Oh my god. I don't know which clip. I forget which clip you saw because there were 3 or 2 that were circling. And I'm trying to remember the details of what I said in that clip. But anyways, if someone watched the whole stream, the purpose of what I was trying to express was I was talking about my perspective on Israel's perspective, right? So it was okay, Israel cares about demographics, right?
Which is a cute way of saying, I mean, that is the sort of thing Richard Spencer would say. I mean, Richard Spencer, fucking any of those pricks, would say that is going to be their go-to euphemism. I'm sure they have said that as well, that they just care about demographics.
I wasn't saying that it was a good thing that it cares about demographics. Mm-hmm. So I was making a descriptive claim.
Well, you're kind of trivializing it when you put it that way. I mean, what you're talking about is Israel would very much like to expel, and specifically has a long history of very open debate about what a disaster it is that the Palestinians have a birth rate, and what could be done in order to reduce the birth rate amongst Palestinians, because which they describe as a demographic bomb. So yeah, when you're just saying they care about demographics, that is kind of whitewashing it a little bit.
Right. And they seem to think that it was a prescriptive claim, that I was saying that so it's a good thing that Israel cares about demographics, or it's something that
Okay, well, Jesus, this wishy-washy fucking language. What does it mean that Israel cares about demographics? Would you care to elaborate on what caring about demographics looks like?
like that I personally care about, and that when it was like very clear that I was demonstrating how Israel cares about demographics.
She's just gonna keep using this term. I mean, Israel just ethnically cleansed another fucking village in the Nakab Desert. I think it was in the Nakab. It's like Munaseriyata or something, a name like that. It's been all over my feed on Twitter lately. Yeah, which is how they care about demographics. That's their way of caring about demographics. Like, not allowing Palestinian towns and villages to have fucking sewerage systems is how they care about demographics. Like, the only reason they agreed to have a sewerage system in occupied East Jerusalem in the first place is, I mean, and you can read the mayor at the time, Meron Benvenisti, about this. He said, you know, obviously this was going to be a public health disaster for for the Jewish population if the Palestinians were not given some kind of access to basic fucking hygiene. You know, not that the Palestinians would have any right to basic hygiene, but that it would be a public health disaster for the ethnic group he cares about. I mean, that's what we're talking about. We talk about caring about demographics. Is Vosh gonna challenge this shit at all?
And so because of that, there are some things that are not feasible within the peace negotiation process. But here are some solutions.
There's something, Jesus, this is so wishy-washy. Like, she doesn't want anyone to say that she's for this stuff, but at the same time, she is using language that makes you wonder why exactly, you know, that if you didn't know anything about this, you'd be like, well, why would anyone be against this stuff? Is he gonna... I mean, we've seen how Vosh reacts when somebody anti-racist is on, and it's that fucking meme where I forget which one, but it's like the ferocious animal of some kind. Oh no. But he's like not challenging any of this so far.
That are feasible. And so, like, that's kind
of... Entering the halls of anguish. I mean, that's what they ought to call Vosh's channel, the halls of anguish. That's what it is.
Like what I was talking about, but because I was making... they seem to just misunderstand that.
And also, what does it mean that these things are not feasible in the peace negotiations because Israel cares about demographics? Like, could you give an example of the things you're fucking talking about? I mean, the fact that you're being so cagey and so absolutely bland and innocuous in your language makes it clear that you actually do know that this stuff is actually horrible, but you would not be able to make the argument that you're trying to make if you acknowledge that.
Like, if you just, like, saw that section where I was kind of talking, because, like, the way I speak and the way I'm often communicating, you know, like, perspectives when I'm, like, teaching people about history or something, I'll be kind of, like, giving their perspective in that moment, right? And so, like, that got clipped completely out of context. And, yeah, and that's why, like, if you watch, like, the video, even just if you watch the 10 minutes around it, it's very clear what I'm talking about.
Well, I mean, you've been talking for 2.5 minutes right now, and it's not actually clear what the hell you're talking about.
So yeah, I've learned that lesson the hard way myself a few times.
You mean like the time that you clipped fucking American Johnson and Luna Oey out of context in order to claim that they were defending Nazi propaganda when they were criticizing you for defending Nazi propaganda? Yeah, I think you know a little bit about dishonest editing.
Yeah, let me talk about this horrible thing.
Oh, we've got anti-Semitic shit right in the chat. Jews are not even half Jews. Oh, we're gonna get into some Khazar bullshit.
Another group of people believe from their voice,
Yeah.
because it would sound good, like rhetorically, for me to deliver it in that format. I've learned that lesson. You know, it's
Yeah, I mean, you can tell he's learned that lesson. I mean, he would never do anything dishonest like that. Ever again.
it's definitely an important one to learn, I think.
Yeah, and I do it so instinctively. Like even tonight, I was streaming and I did like an impression of Bad Empanada, like with the Australian accent, and I said some vile things that way, and I was like, "Fuck!" I just did it again. Like even though I was trying to make a point about how ridiculous the shit he says is.
Well, and, I've seen what he said about you, and what he said about you is actually valid. Like, if what he's saying is ridiculous, you could prove it by actually saying that you're against Israeli apartheid, that you what you're talking about is caring about demographics is known in international law as apartheid and genocide. You could do all sorts of things to prove that Bad Empanada had a bad take, that he got the wrong end of it, but you're not doing that.
Yeah. Chat's suggestion is that whenever you're going to do that, you do it in a ridiculous accent. I have no idea what an Israeli accent sounds like, but for Bad
I can
Empanada...
so easily become racist though, so I'm a little scared to do that.
Yes, I'm not surprised to hear that you could easily become racist. I was getting that impression already.
Yeah, true, but at least it's more fun when you get caught.
That's true.
Yeah, anyway. Well, I'm sorry about the merciless clip chimping. I saw that, what's her name? Etrius? Apologized?
Yeah, it was really nice of her. Getting a lot of respect to her for apologizing.
Yeah, which surprised me.
Yeah, I was like, wait, is someone on Twitter?
So is he gonna
Apologize?
challenge
Like,
her
I
on
don't know
any
who
of
she
this?
is or anything.
She's an insufferable, like, ultra-anarchist ideologue. You know, every time I see her on the TL, it's something like, you know.
Oh, determining.
Actually,
okay, this will be good.
yes, socialists would abolish time, or something like that. You know, so I'm being facetious. I like her, but anyway, I was surprised by the apology. So you said that your videos have been degraded?
Yeah, on YouTube. Ever since he's been making videos about me like nonstop, and everyone told me to just ignore him. But
Which
the
one?
more
Bad
I ignored
Empanada?
him, yeah, but like the more I ignored him, the more like a lot of people started to buy into his narrative because I was never responding. So, and he was just like, there were a lot of things that he was saying that were just completely untrue. I God knows, I probably say some of the dumbest shit sometimes, and
You see, okay. Let's see, I'm gonna skip ahead a little bit on this. This is long, and I'm hoping at some point we get into something, like, concrete.
so I guess like the genocide of indigenous people is okay because you get to live a house that came from. He just suddenly started being really aggressive in my chat. And the fact that he just totally like discounts. He also like every time he gives me an analogy to demonstrate.
Who's he talking about?
You
Who's he
wait.
talking about?
But yeah, it seems to be like a lot of people are believing the stuff that he's saying.
So you do deny the white allegation?
Yes, I am not white, you know. So it's apparently a terrible thing to be white, and so I'm very grateful.
Have you considered calling him anti-Semitic?
You never want to be that person. I don't
you
know.
might eventually, though. Eventually, you might want to be that person. I take great.
Like, okay, but he hasn't said anything anti-Semitic though. Although that doesn't, of course, that wouldn't actually stop Vosh.
Pleasure in calling pseudo-leftists anti-white. You know, eventually it actually.
Yeah. Oh, well, yes. You see, he enjoys. He takes great pleasure in being racist.
Is the most fun option.
He did say, like, I was watching one of his videos, and he did say some, like, kind of JQ sassy stuff. And,
like what?
And and the fact that he just totally, like, discounts. He also, like, every time he gives me an analogy to demonstrate how evil I am, it always involves, like, the Holocaust, which feels pretty gross.
Feels like he supports the Holocaust.
I'm sure he would say he.
Oh, so that's where that clip comes from. Bad Empanada uses that a lot. And it's kind of funny because Vosh has defended one of the biggest lies that was used to make the Holocaust possible in the first place.
He doesn't. But the fact that every analogy is always like the Holocaust, and he knows that I'm Jewish, he knows that my grandparents are survivors, like, it just feels like he's particularly trying to use my...
Well, maybe it's because you're talking about... I mean, you see, this is just so maddening. He's not pressing her to give anything concrete. And she's just sitting here like, oh, he used analogies and the Holocaust was involved. It's like, well, he is talking... I mean, we're talking about Israel. I assume we're talking about it because his criticisms of her specifically have been for her defense of the colonial ethno-state of Israel. And, yeah, when you talk about genocide... When you talk about genocides, which, I mean, Israel's fairly openly genocidal. I mean, not the only country to be so. The U.S. is even more so in many ways. But yeah, it does come up.
My history and my oppression against me. And it's just really mean because I never came after him. I didn't hate the guy. Like, I don't know, like, where this came from. He just suddenly started being really aggressive in my chat. I was talking about it started when I was talking about how I liked some aspects of Canada, and this was after going on stream after stream talking about the various genocides that have happened to Indigenous people in Canada.
Happened.
And so, like, I kind of wanted to give other perspectives since it was something that we were always talking about. I wanted to talk.
See, when it's other things, she can say genocide, but when it's Israel, it's caring about demographics. And fucking Vosh doesn't say a thing.
Talk about like an immigrant's perspective on Canada and some of like the positives that Canada brings to the table. And he like assumed, he just hops in, he hears that, and he just says that, oh, you're justifying, so I guess like the genocide of Indigenous people is okay because you get to live a happy life.
Well, I mean, you've been, just in this chat so far, you've been trivializing the genocide of Indigenous people, calling it caring about demographics.
And that's not what I was saying at all. And then, yeah, he's hated me ever since.
He's like Kiwi Farms tier. I really wouldn't worry about it too much. As for the perception that like people are turning against you narrative-wise or something like that, I think that it's important to remember this. Okay, this is.
I mean, it's really useful to contrast this with the way that he really just went after, after Professor Flowers, for example, where I mean it was just absolutely relentless, trying to put words in her mouth, and then like accusing her of saying the shit. Even when he failed to get her to say it after, like, browbeating for her for hours. And when this is just complete softballs. Like, we're, like, 7 minutes in, and she just keeps on saying, caring about demographics, and some aspects of the peace negotiations might not be feasible. And, he's, like, not... I mean, he's not challenging any of this.
This is like an object lesson in any like large or medium-sized streamer. It's whenever you're having an argument with chat, or you feel like people are really dogpiling you, and you feel like you see like a ton of hate in chat, and you're thinking like, oh god, you know what you can do. Everyone does this eventually. You ban 3 people, and all the hate in the chat is cut down by 80%. We don't actually register.
Well, since when do you care about the hate in chat? You encourage people to send hate to other people's chats.
Where the hate comes from. We just get kind of a vague understanding that we're being attacked from other people.
Yeah.
Is this just like solidarity between streamers who've said racist shit? Is that what we're looking at?
If it's in this case, I mean, I don't know obviously, but I'd be willing to bet that it's probably not a representative sample of people's opinions towards you.
Yeah, and I think like I don't know, I already have some low self-esteem, so it's like very easy for me to, my mind just naturally has a bias towards looking at like the negative comments. But I honestly, I feel like I can handle a lot of the hateful comments. If people criticize my actual views, like I kind of welcome that stuff, even if they're really mean about it.
Like you aren't even talking about your actual views so far. I mean, It's interesting. You've said that things are not your actual views, but you've not actually said what your actual views are. And personally, I have to say, maybe this is just me. If somebody falsely attributes views to me, I make a point of not just saying, that's not what I think at all, but I actually make a point of saying what I do think. And she's being very, very cautious not to actually say anything at all on the subject.
It's the lies that I didn't, and I expected to get that stuff as a public figure. I was like prepared. What I wasn't, and I should have been prepared for this, but I just didn't expect people to be like lying so much, like that, just making up stuff.
Also,
that kind of drives me crazy.
Preparing for it intellectually is not the same as actually dealing with it, right?
Yep.
God, this is silly. I mean, Vosh talking about dealing with online harassment and dishonest bullshit. This is so fucking deep, because he's talking about people doing exactly what his entire brand is.
Because every time this happens to me, like I see super bad faith or dumb shit or whatever, I'm like, okay, well, I knew this would happen. But you can tell yourself that, but that's not really the same as like being emotionally prepared for the dumb shit every time. In reality,
well, which is what your viewers have to do. I mean, we have to, those of us who watch your streams, have to be emotionally prepared for the fact that there's going to be some bullshit, and some of it is going to be like outright just borderline gaslighting in not and you're gonna deliver it all in this monotone. It's like we were talking earlier, I was talking about how the guy, that Navarro guy that was on the Tim Pool cast, reminded me of like one type of guy who annoys the shit out of me at pubs, won't let me just sit there and read, and doesn't know anything about what the book is about, but insists on telling me about it. And he's like the other kind of guy who does that. His demeanor is spot on that.
Every time you do have that same internal, like, oh my fucking god, I cannot believe that this is the world that we live in. That same reaction happens every time, I think, no matter what.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, there are streamers out there, Vosh, I mean, it would really shock you, who, if you just say you're against colonialism, will accuse you of supporting white genocide.
You do.
Mm-hmm. Have you, had any safety concerns and stuff because of the hate that you've gotten?
Not really. I guess, with regards to, the conferences?
See, I was hoping that we would actually get into her views in this, but it's mostly about, this is just a chance for both of them to play the victim. She went to exactly the right stream for this. Okay, I'm kind of curious. I think I'm going to skip ahead. There's a section called Determining Genuine Criticism. Maybe this is...
I guess, I always have this fear that someone is going to say something that's, legitimate, and I'm going to, miss out on some good criticism.
Oh, fuck. Oh, that does not work. Trust me. You have to find people you trust and rely on them for your criticism, because the wisdom of the crowds breaks down for online figures.
Yeah, well, yes. I mean, that's his entire business model. Okay, this is boring me. I'm sure he is. I'm going to switch over there. I've got more of this.
Oh, Fox left out so much here that really upsets me. This is so important.
Yeah, I'm sure he definitely is trying to get into her pants. And also, I mean, she's somebody who, at the very least, for somebody who insists that she's not saying racist things, she's very reluctant to say not racist things, and there's a natural sympathy there.
So, we're going to look into the history of the Israeli-Palestine conflict. We're going to watch a Vox video. I have a feeling the Vox video is going to lean very, very anti-Israel. And it's...
No, why would it? I mean, this is Vox. These are... It's like the New Republic, the new media version of the 1980s New Republic. I mean, it is... the blandest. It is takes that are about as spicy as a fucking unsalted baked potato. If she thinks Vox is gonna be anti-Israel, that already says something. Okay.
There's probably going to be some misconceptions in there. We'll see. So I'll fact check them and we'll give that a watch.
One of the biggest myths about the Israel-Palestine conflict is that it's been going on for centuries, all about ancient religious hatreds. In fact...
Okay, so far that's quite right. It has not been going on for centuries, and it isn't based on ancient religious hatreds. In fact, Jewish Palestinians, Christian Palestinians, and Muslim Palestinians got on pretty well. And...
while religion is involved, conflict's mostly about two groups of people who claim the same land.
So, just right there, I agree with them. I mean, the conflict has not been going on for centuries. It largely starts at the end of the 19th century with the beginning of the influx of European Jewish immigrants to the area of
yeah, not immigrants, though. This is a thing. I mean, there are two groups of people who love to conflate colonization and immigration. And one is people who want to, incite violence against immigrants. And the other is people who want to whitewash colonization.
Palestine. There'd always been Jews living in Palestine, but there was a huge influx of immigration because of Zionism and anti-Semitism in Europe. And that's really when the conflict starts. Because, I don't know if you know this.
Is she going to use the word colonization, I wonder?
But people tend to not like immigrants. People tend not to not like...
They're not immigrants. Immigrants don't show up with fucking guns and say, okay, it's our country now. That's not immigrants. The only people who claim that immigrants are acting like that are fucking Nazis.
Like refugees, and a lot of refugees coming all at once. I know lefties normally love that, though for some reason they make an exception when it comes to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Because it's not the same thing. Because it's literally not that thing. It's one thing when people... See, if it had just been refugees, that would be one thing. Everybody would have been cool with that. Palestinians probably would have been pretty cool with that, for the most part. The problem was they decided to actually, declare it their territory and take it over, which is not a thing immigrants do. It's not a thing refugees do.
But that's when the conflict really begins. But that doesn't mean that the seeds of the conflict weren't there beforehand. So in a way, the area of Palestine has always had a lot of problems for thousands of years, as I've talked about. So I think that that's why people say it goes on for thousands of years.
No, that's not why people say it goes on for thousands of years. That is a propaganda talking point that is used to make it seem like it's terribly complicated and intractable, as opposed to actually one of the simplest and easiest to understand conflicts going on the planet today. It's the whole point of that is to say that it's just something that can never possibly be solved. Look, it's been going on for thousands of years. That's the whole idea. I mean, that's not hard.
It's really just kind of like a language thing. But where I really agree with Vox here is that it's not, the core of the issue is not religious. Religion adds fuel to the fire. That's how I'll describe it. But the fire...
So, yeah, I mean, the thing is that actually, religious conflict compared to Europe, that's the thing that a lot of people really don't get, because we have, European Jewish history, and the tendency is, and this is actually kind of a fundamental aspect of Zionist ideology as well, is to try to universalize the European Jewish experience and say that that's just how it's been for Jews everywhere, and it's just not true. Actually, Jews in majority Muslim areas, Jews did have done historically pretty well. One of the best places to be Jewish in medieval Europe was Cordoba, which was under the rule of a Muslim king. I forget the exact title of the person or even their name, but they weren't interested in getting rid of Jews. They weren't. They at the most, there's tax from other religions. Oh, hello, Rika. Are you... Oletko suomalainen, Rika? Jotta mulle on tuttu Facebookista. Oh, wait, are you saying this aristocracy was against the pipeline protests?
Will exist with or without religion. It's very much about ethnic groups, like, claiming the same land.
Yes, and... yeah, well, yes, exactly. And one of the thing that gets me about that, they'll be like, look, we had legal title. I mean... like that makes it different from colonization in other places. Like in Chile, one of the ways they kicked Mapuche off the land was through bullshit land purchase arrangements. I mean, and the U.S. had the Homestead Act that did the same thing. I mean, having some sort of fucking legal deed that does not require the consent of the people actually living there is a fairly standard colonial strategy.
It's a geopolitical land issue. You take religion out of the picture, and I guarantee you it will still be a problem. Maybe not as intense of a problem, but it will still be an issue.
And it really only goes back about a century to the early 1900s. Around then, the region along the eastern Mediterranean we now call Israel-Palestine, been under Ottoman...
No, Zionism actually would totally exist without Judaism. A lot of people have...
well, wait. Okay, that's a weird one. I mean... What's true about that is that Zionism didn't start out as an ideology embraced by Jews. It actually started out as an ideology embraced by anti-Semitic Christians. And then some right-wing bourgeois Jews like Herzl decided to adopt it. They decided they kind of liked the idea. But, okay.
Have a misunderstanding. So Judaism is the religion of the Jewish people. But the Jewish people exist without that religion. And I think that...
Okay, first of all, I mean, this is already a Zionist idea that there's only one Jewish people. That, I mean, and in fact, this is one of the things that actually you really notice. You read Zionist thinkers from, like, the early 20th century, and they don't give a shit about Jews, about Arab Jews or Jews in India. Like, I mean, there's a whole Judeo-Malayalam language. They didn't give a shit about any of that. It was just like European Jews, and they just sort of universalized that, and they said that is like the Jewish people, the Jewish culture. There's only one. When in fact it's a fucking I mean, if anything, there are multiple Jewish peoples who have certain things in common and certain things not in common. Like, I mean, you can't really say, unless you're just going to skip over the last couple of thousand years, that that Jews in Iraq, for example, that Iraqi Jews, that Moroccan Jews have the same history as European Jews. We simply don't. They, I mean, actually... Are you by any chance, are you from Finland by any chance, Rika? I have a Rika on my, Facebook, and I'm wondering if you're them.
That is one of the larger misconceptions. I think people have this idea, and it's probably a Christian idea or a Muslim idea, right? Because Christianity and Islam they're purely religions. Anyone can become that. They're not based on some kind of ancestry or anything.
Well, yeah, except, see, again, this is one of those things where there's actually an important difference. Because the reason that you have this sort of, this racialization, this ethnicization of Jews specifically in Europe, is because we were segregated out of the mainstream society to a great extent for a very long time, and essentially had to sort of keep our own counsel, developed our own languages. It wasn't just Yiddish. It wasn't just Ladino or Judeo-Espanol either. There are a whole bunch. It's like Judeo-Occitan. There are a bunch of them, but the result is that when you started to have like secularization through like what was called the Enlightenment in the majority culture, or Haskalah in the Jewish culture in Europe, what you had was still a largely segregated society. So what you get is a development of a secular Jewish culture, which it was not a thing that existed in quite the same way in societies where Jews were much more integrated.
Anything like that. Whereas being Jewish is much more like being Romani or being being indigenous, right? Like a part of an indigenous tribe. It's like you can trace your lineage to a tribe, right? You were kicked out of your indigenous homeland.
Well, yeah, put a pin in that. We'll see what I think I know what she means when she's gonna say indigenous homeland. And that's gonna be bullshit.
And some people have the religion, some people don't. A lot of people still have aspects of the culture, but that kind of thing, it's a very, very different dynamic. That's why it's called an ethno-religious group and not just a religious group. So that's why.
Yeah, but there are fucking historical reasons for this. This didn't come out of nowhere, and there's a reason that it's much more true of Europe than of other places. Yeah, okay. I was just wondering if you were like using a non. Yeah, I know the person I'm talking about does spell Rica. Treaty 8. Where's that exactly?
Zionism would exist without Judaism, because even if all Jews were atheists, right, it doesn't actually affect their historical connection, right, to the region. The same way, if a bunch
a historical connection that in, like, recorded history, cool. That you have to go back, like, there's basically nobody who can actually trace an ancestor all the way back there. And in fact, not every European Jew can. I mean, even if we're just talking about European Jews, because, I mean, converts exist. And there used to be a lot more of that converting than there is now. There's less of it now. But under Jewish religious law, they're all as Jewish, one's as Jewish as the other, whether it's by conversion or anything else. But you're talking about an extremely tenuous connection here. Like,
of indigenous Canadians, like from, say, like the Mohawk tribe, suddenly stopped believing in their Mohawk religion. I'm not sure about the details of what they believe in. They wouldn't suddenly stop claiming Canada as, their home, because that's still their historical home. So,
I thought they were, aren't they Akwesasne?
It's not really as much about religion as you think. There's also a lot of religious reasons why you wouldn't support Jewish religion reasons why you wouldn't support the creation of a modern Israeli state, as initially Zionism was pushing for. It actually broke a lot of Torah rules initially, and
not just initially either. I mean, and one of the more fucked up things about Israeli society, just like when you, apart from the whole settler colonial nature, apart from the racism, is this deal that the Zionist movement made with reactionary religious fundamentalists that gave these fundamentalist rabbis the absolute control over family relations and personal status law, to the extent that there's no civil marriage. I mean, never mind same-sex marriage or anything like that. I mean, there are all sorts of just utterly arcane bans on marriage, like, based on scriptural shit that pretty much nobody except these, like, hardcore ultra-fundamentalist rabbis even pay attention to. Like, there are rules about, people, about who Cohens can marry. Because Cohen is from Kahan, and that refers to, like, the priestly class, and all this sort of shit. So, okay.
Rabbis did a lot of negotiations to make that happen later.
Yeah, and I mean, those negotiations, I mean, one of the worst things about Israeli society.
To make that okay later. But the kind of being Jewish that Israel recognizes today as being religiously Jewish, so even if Zionism Judaism is still a big part of it. Oh yeah, Judaism is still a part of it, right? But it's not like the core. And Jewish people were particularly Zionists, were very, very non-religious. If they might not necessarily have been. Some of them were atheists, some of them were deists, but very few of them believed in the like Jewish religion of God's chosen people, or like.
Yeah, that's actually pretty accurate. I mean, you look at Zionism is just traditionally just an ideology that a lot of its lineage is from like German romantic nationalism, and religion kind of comes into it in very opportunistic ways. Vosh identifies as an anarchist in. It's really remarkable because anytime he actually starts to talk about what kind of politics he wants, as opposed to just slagging random people off or sucking up to them, is that it just comes out as just bog standard neoliberalism. Like he thought NAFTA was a good idea.
Like God's chosen land, that was not really a core part of Zionism, and that was actually, it was much more co-opted by the religious right later on.
In fact, Zionists initially weren't sold on Palestine as the place to go. And there were various options. They were specifically looking for places where the British Empire might be of help, because they figured that was who was most likely to help them out. And plus, the British Empire just held the most territory, most likely to have some that they might be willing to part with. Like they wanted part of Kenya, for example, was an option that they'd considered, although for some reason Hatsa referred to it as Uganda. Even though it was the specific tract of land he was talking about was definitely Kenya, now and then. And there was also some brief talk about Patagonia, which even today, it gave rise to Latin America's only like truly original anti-Semitic conspiracy theory, one that continues to exist even today. That there's a Jewish conspiracy to take over, a Zionist conspiracy to take over Patagonia, which makes all sorts of sense until you think about it for like half a second and realize that Israel's not going to be able to maintain this artificial colonial majority even in Palestine right now. And they're talking, and supposedly they want to take over, an area of land as big as Patagonia and dilute that even more. But that doesn't stop. Nazis in Argentina invented it. And in fact, during the dictatorship in the late 70s, early 80s in Argentina, a lot of Jews who ended up getting picked up by the dictatorship report having been questioned about their designs on Patagonia. And you still hear this shit in Chile as well, where they'll be like, oh, there were Israeli tourists doing cartography in Patagonia. It's like the place has already been pretty well mapped, They were doing tourism. Nobody's trying to fucking take Patagonia, and certainly Israel isn't, because they could barely manage to keep above 50% in the land they've already got.
Now it is a huge thing, right? And it wasn't originally.
Rule for centuries was religiously diverse, including mostly Muslims and Christians, also a small number of Jews who lived generally in peace. It was changing in two important ways. First, more people in the region were developing a sense of being not just ethnic Arabs, but Palestinians, a distinct national identity.
So there is this narrative, and Vox is kind of pushing this, which I see as somewhat problematic, that, I don't know, would you consider black people living in apartheid South Africa living in peace? It's like...
Well, except that isn't... They weren't... You gonna claim that there was an apartheid system in Palestine before Zionism? See, if Jews were so hard done by in Palestine before Zionist colonization, then you'd think that the Palestinian Jews would have been really cool with Zionism, and in fact, they weren't. They were against it because it was ruining their relations with their Christian and their Christian and Muslim neighbors. And in fact, Palestinian Jews were some of the first targets of the Zionist paramilitary, specifically because they opposed this colonization. I mean, this idea that there was an apartheid system targeting Jews specifically, and that Jews were in Palestine were somehow equivalent to black South Africans.
The biggest problems is that Jews in Palestine were always second-class citizens, and I mean that in a literal way. They were things in the Ottoman Empire system. They were called demis. They were regularly subjected to massacres and.
So okay. Yeah. Now the term. We're getting into some Islamification conspiracy theory shit right here, and I am for it.
Genocides and discrimination. They had to pay extra taxes. Like, the reason why, like, it often gets a bit...
It was the... Okay, and yet it actually still wasn't anything compared to the fucking ongoing massacre that was Jewish life in Europe. That's why, I mean, they were... actually, Palestinian Jews didn't really have any problems until colonization, and suddenly they were getting eyed with suspicion. It was fucking up their relationships. And in fact, that was Arab Jews in general had that problem.
Better reputation was because it's better than what was going on in medieval Europe, right? And it was better than what was going on in 19th century Europe. But it was still
and better than what was going on in 20th century Europe. Okay, I mean, okay, she acknowledges that. And it was much better. It was so much better that the fucking... I mean, you'd think that the Palestinian Jews would have welcomed Zionist colonization if it was as bad as what she's talking about.
Very, very bad, right? So this idea that they were living fine in relative peace, that's why they add the term relative, right? Because what you consider peace is a little, and it's a bit of a misconception.
Identity. At the same time, not so far away in Europe, more Jews were joining a movement called Zionism, which said that...
Well, more than none. It was at this point in the history of Zionism, it was a very unpopular movement.
Judaism was not just a religion,
Jews,
but a nationality, one that deserved a nation of its own.
Yeah, and I want to repeat, this is totally true. In the 19th century, nationalism was a huge, huge movement. It was a trend. Right? Like the way we see trends right now where, like, I don't know, there's a trend this year where people are saying eat the rich on their dresses or something. There was a trend of nationalism. And even though today in 2021 we see nationalism as this right-wing concept. And
well, I mean, people actually at the time saw nationalism as this right-wing concept. I mean, there was also another trend you may have heard of in Europe at the time called fucking communism. And in fact, I mean... what distinguished the Zionists from every other Jewish political movement, including movements much bigger than Zionism at the time, is that Zionism was against the emancipation of Jews in Europe. Every other fucking Jewish political tendency worthy of even mentioning, their big thing was liberation of Jews in their respective homes in Europe. Equal rights, equal participation in society, that sort of thing. And Zionism explicitly opposed that, which is a big part of why it was unpopular amongst Jews. And yeah, I'm pretty sure she means dhimmis, or maybe she thinks that all Palestinian Jews were demi Moore. Shit, sorry about that.
in reality, in the 19th century, nationalism was seen as a progressive leftist kind of concept.
No, it wasn't, actually. I mean, first of all, there's nationalism and there's nationalism. There's the civic nationalism of liberté, égalité, fraternité, and that sort of thing. And that was like liberalism. That was one of the sort of major achievements, kind of liberalism. This idea that everybody, you're a citizen of where you're born, and all of that. But then there's also blood and soil nationalism, romantic nationalism, the German school of nationalism, which is where Zionism draws its ideas from, and that was a very reactionary. I mean, but even at this time, I mean, you're talking about this. The Bund was actually quite big at this time. In fact, one of the things on Hebrew being spoken as a first language in Palestine after circa the 5th century. Oh, shit. I bet if you were to just look up any book on Eliezer ben Yehuda, I'll write his name down just in case, who's sort of like the father of the revival of Hebrew, they will probably talk about that, because I did my like bat mitzvah project. I had to do a paper for that on Jewish languages, and I had to read all sorts of academic articles on Eliezer ben Yehuda, and I'm pretty sure some of that talked about the use of Hebrew as a vernacular at the time.
Because nationalism, and wait for it, Twitter is going to be really upset, but nationalism in that context was actually antithetical to what was going on at the time, which was imperialism.
Yeah, Twitter's gonna be, because that doesn't even make any fucking sense. Nationalism was not antithetical to imperialism. Now you can say that there are like, nationalism amongst colonized people will push against, at the very least, the imperialism that they're colonized by. But that's not, but nationalism as a whole, specifically in Europe, was not anti-imperialist. Quite the contrary.
Nationalism was a way to end imperialism, to end colonialism. Oh, I mean nationalism in general, right? There was Arab nationalism.
Nationalism in general, no, that's exactly wrong. Like, nationalism was not anti-imperialist in the 19th century. It isn't now either, unless we're specifically talking about, like, the nationalism of colonized people as part of their, like, anti-colonial movement. There you can make an argument for that. But, I mean, to say that, like, German nationalism, British nationalism, English nationalism, and British nationalism is just English nationalism when it's imposed on places outside England, really. French nationalism, to say that shit is anti-imperialist?
There was Asian nationalism. There was lots of different forms of nationalism. African nationalism comes a little later, but
these are not the same thing.
There was a huge trend of nationalism in general. Everyone wanted.
We're talking about the late 19th century, which actually is not really the dawn of nationalism either. I mean, you're talking about... We're talking about the late 19th century, early 20th, and when, in fact, the dawn of all these major nationalisms of Europe is actually about 100 years before that. Some cases more like 150, 200 years before that. I mean, these are the... I mean, this is wild to say, and she's specifically saying that that this is... Yeah, that this is all nationalisms. Okay, I just see that. Something didn't come through the chat, apparently.
Wants their own state. Everyone wants their own state for their people. This idea, there had been an old idea of like these empires overreaching.
That wasn't an old idea at the time. I mean, that wasn't like an idea that it was on its way out. The British Empire was only really just getting started in the mid 19th century.
controlling everything and everyone being in control of those empires. And finally, a lot of those individual groups were like, no, we want our own self-determination. Now we see this as a right-wing point of view because...
Jesus Christ, it's like she doesn't... No wonder Vosh wants to get into her pants. She knows even less about this shit than him. Even I have absolutely no faith in Vosh's ability to know anything, to be honest with you. But I think even he would actually do a better job with this bit. I mean, this is just... you know...
We've seen the consequence of people having their own self-determination based on ethnic groups. Causes a lot of problems. But at the time, it was seen as a very lefty thing to get out of what was considered...
Yeah, we're talking about the late 19th century when the lefty thing to do was communism. And, like, social democracy. And social democrats didn't suck anywhere near as much shit as they do now.
...considered a larger evil, which was imperialism. So nationalism is a huge trend, and Jews are not unique in this trend. Everyone's trying to get, like, Arabs and Palestine are trying to get their own nationalism because they are also under the control of the Turks in the Ottoman Empire. So this is a larger trend in general. It's not just a Jewish thing.
And after centuries...
God. So... That was painful. Like...
years of persecution, many believed a Jewish state was their only way...
Oh, you mean what period we're talking about with the birth of modern Hebrew? Okay, now I understand. Well, he really... See, it's not that, the period is much later. The period is like the late 19th, early 20th century. But any book that's worth anything on Eliezer ben Yehuda and the history of modern Hebrew is going to talk about, like, where it was being used as a... Like, I think Yemen, actually was a place where it was still being used as a vernacular well after the 5th century. I didn't know about Palestine. But, I mean, any treatment, I bet even an encyclopedia article on modern Hebrew would probably talk about the antecedents there. But Ben Yehuda was late 19th century, early 20th.
Way of safety, and saw their historic homeland in the Middle East as their best hope for establishing it. In the first...
This is very, very... I'm glad that Vosh said historic, right? People often think that this is based on Jews having a religious connection.
Well, yes. I mean, that has been the excuse.
Right, that they wanted to go to Israel because it was their religious right.
Well, yeah, they were supporting national self-determination, not in general, like, not nationalism in general. Like, we're talking about, like, the national self-determination of colonies, of colonized people, like the national self-determination of Ireland or colonized places, but she's talking about nationalism in general. Oh, okay, that's a very interesting thing that I had never heard, Rika. Yeah, I mean, she's, like, lumping all this stuff together and also taking the term, moving the timeline of nationalism back 100 years. And there's so many fucking distinctions that have to be made here. Like, between civic nationalism and romantic blood-and-soil nationalism and, like, anti-colonial nationalism, all these fucking things. And and this is all for a history of Zionism, which is actually very specifically the most reactionary kind of nationalism. It is explicitly blood-and-soil nationalism. It is based on the idea that Jews are foreigners in our own homes. And the only reason that we're foreigners is because our blood makes us so, which is all completely nonsense. Yeah, but she specifically said all nationalism. I would not be. I would, if she had been specific and saying like the national. Jesus. Yeah, I mean, this is just already quite bad.
Very few Jews at the time believed that. A lot believe that now, but at the time,
Yeah, at the time, very few Jews were actually all that impressed with Zionism as a whole. I mean, it was actually a small and very bourgeois movement that saw itself specifically as trying to edge out the really mass movements that were going on.
very few believed that at the time, right? Like, it was very much based on a historical right, on a historical homeland, the same way Mohawks would be connected to the area of southern Ontario. This is based in history.
Southern Ontario, I mean, one of the largest reserves is actually in southern Quebec and crosses over into upstate New York. I knew about this because it is one of the places where you can cross the border into Canada or from Canada into the US without going through customs or showing a passport.
We know that Jews come from that region. This is a
No, we actually don't. Some Jews do, some Jews don't. And aside from that, just because... And we also know Palestinians come from that region. In fact, there is a fair bit of work that has suggested that actually the Palestinian community were largely Jews living in Palestine who converted first to Christianity and then later on to Islam. I mean, there's a historian by the name of Shlomo Zand who wrote a whole book on this years ago. Like, I mean, we're talking like maybe 10, 15 years ago. But, like, one of the things that's interesting, when you look at attempts to... A lot of the evidence that is cited for some sort of expulsion of most or all Jews from Palestine, it turns out it is not contemporary. It's from several hundred years later, and it is Christian apologetics specifically aimed at convincing Jews that they had been punished by God for not accepting Jesus. Which immediately makes it a little bit suspect. But we know that there was a Jewish community in Palestine that never went anywhere. And, you know, some of them are still there, and some of them converted in various directions. Yeah, that was... I remember Lance from the Serfs debating Lauren Southern, and that was fucked, honestly. I don't... See, it's one thing when you do reaction videos and you talk about these pricks. I'm cool with that. I mean, obviously I'm cool with that. I'm fucking doing it. I think that that's good. I think that good things can come out of it. But giving them a platform to talk to them and let them, like, actually defend their fucked up ideas is bullshit. Yeah, I mean... By the way, welcome, Rika. I didn't really give you a proper welcome. I always love seeing new people show up here. It happens so rarely.
Historical fact. It's not something that some god invented. It's not something that some Bible invented. In fact, there's a lot of things that the Bible actually is wrong about. For example, the Bible describes the Jews as this new people that come and defeat the Canaanites to take over the area of Palestine, or it's called Canaan.
Well, okay, so mythology isn't historically accurate. Yeah, I mean, yeah, kind of, that's kind of, a lot of the time it isn't even trying to be. Even though some people insist on trying to view it as, like, a factual account, but... I mean, even that is seriously ahistorical. Traditionally, it was not viewed as a factual account most of the time. But, yeah, that doesn't change the fact that if we're allowed to just show up in places where, hypothetically, our ancestors lived, like, 2,000 or more years ago, and just say, yeah, we're taking this shit, I mean, you would have endless fucking war. Like... there are bits of Europe, there are entire European peoples who nobody questions that they're European, who have been in Europe less time than Jews. Jews, I mean, the amount of time European Jews have been in Europe is actually, I mean, is roughly twice as long as Hungarians have been there. Nobody questions that Hungarians' right to be in Europe, but I mean, ours is questioned not just by, like, regular anti-Semites, but also the Zionist kind. I mean, there was a few years ago, there was a find just outside Köln in Germany. They found they were digging a Roman settlement from 2,000 years ago, and they found it actually had a Jewish quarter. 2,000 years ago, in northwestern Germany, there was a well-established Jewish quarter, which means that Jews have been in Europe longer than Christianity has been on Earth. But somehow, we are always considered not to be really of Europe, and Zionism endorses that view. I've heard those place names, Erica, although honestly I can't completely bring to mind exactly where they would be.
At the time, right? In reality, what most historians and archaeologists heavily suspect is that the Jews were the Canaanites, and they were just kind of like a burgeoning population within the Canaanites as they became monotheistic. Fascinating stuff. If you're religious and Jewish, it's probably really upsetting to hear. But that's the current attitude within it, right? So there is a long historical connection of, the Jewish people as a tribe, not a religion, to the region.
First decades of the 20th century, tens of thousands of European Jews moved there. After World War I, the Ottoman Empire collapsed.
Okay. See, we're going to find out exactly what she's made of. If she brings up, there's a particular piece of bullshit Zionist apologetics about something called the San Remo Declaration, which they use as proof that Palestinians have no claim whatsoever to their homeland, based on the idea that Britain had said that part of Palestine was to be a Jewish homeland without prejudice to the rights of the people already living there. Okay, so let's see if she brings that up, or if she doesn't.
British and French empires carved up the Middle East, the British taking control of a region it called the British Mandate for Palestine. At first, the British allowed Jewish immigration.
Exactly. So the Mandate of Palestine really doesn't last for a very long time. In regards to...
Okay, allowed Jewish immigration is just wrong. It wasn't allowed Jewish immigration. Okay. Southern Ontario. Okay. I can picture that. Even though Ontario is just altogether unreasonably wide as a province. That's just that's like the cartographers, when they were carving that up, were like, okay, fuck it, we'll stick the western border somewhere over here, fuck it. But, I mean, first of all, I mean, the term immigration is just wrong when they were specifically calling it a national home. And the thing is, she's going to mention the Balfour Declaration, I'm sure. I mean, she can't be that fucking ignorant. And one interesting fact about the Balfour Declaration, which was the declaration that Britain, was committing to basically getting rid of British and continental Jews by dumping them off in Palestine, at least some of them, as what they called our little loyal Jewish Ulster, a reference to the loyalist settler community in the 6 counties in Ireland. But there was one Jewish member in the cabinet that Balfour sat on, a guy by the name of Montague. And he wrote a blistering condemnation of the Balfour Declaration, saying it was anti-Semitic, which it was, specifically saying that what it was doing was giving the territorial expression to the accusations of dual loyalty that had been leveled at Jews for ages and had, gotten a lot of Jews killed over the years. And he said, that he said it was an absolute insult, and it aged a hell of a lot better than the Declaration itself. I was reminded of this because, part of why I was late, I was finishing up a movie called Operation Mincemeat, which is a true story about, one of the greatest moments in the history of bullshit. Some of the greatest bullshit ever developed to, convince Germany in World War II that the Allies were going to land in Greece instead of fucking Sicily, as they obviously were going to land because it was just the best place. And one of the people who was involved in this operation was a Jewish barrister called Montague, spelt exactly the same way. I'm pretty sure they would have to be related. There can't be too many London upper class Jewish Montague families that they would be completely unrelated. But I was reminded of it because of that. So, the one Jewish member of the fucking cabinet that adopted the Balfour Declaration said it was anti-Semitic, and that aged pretty well.
To control over the region, it's actually probably the shortest empire. The Ottoman Empire controlled it for much longer. The Roman Empire controlled it for much longer. The Byzantine Empire controlled it for much longer. So it's actually one of the minor points, but it's very important because it directly leads to the creation of the modern Israeli state.
But as more Jews arrived, settling into farming communities, tension between Jews and Arabs grew.
Settling into farming communities that had been farmed by Palestinians until they arrived. The tension wasn't just that they settled into farming communities. It was that the farming communities already existed and were being farmed by other people until they fucking got there.
Both sides committed acts of violence, and by the 1930s, the British began limiting...
Yeah, they're so worried. She's so worried about Vox being anti-Israel. I mean, Vox is just, the home of the liberal both sides crap. They will both sides everything.
Jewish immigration.
And that is true. There were actually huge massacres. There was a Hebron massacre, right, where there's actually regions in Israel where there are no Jews. And I know this is crazy, right, but because tons of Jews were actually just literally massacred in those regions.
Well, I mean, the main reason there are regions in Israel where there are no Jews at this point is because the country is segregated, and the state of the places where the Palestinian towns that weren't wiped off the map in 1948, because they're just not given any fucking infrastructure funding, they're not given any support for development, for ensuring basic services. I mean, anyone who had a choice to live someplace else would live someplace else, unless that was just a matter of principle to stay there. And in fact, a lot of the fucking new the new construction in Israel, there are specific rules again where the neighborhood committees can decide whether somebody is suitable to move in, and suitable means not Palestinian.
Hebron is one of them. There were also massacres.
That is not a place where no Jews live. There is a huge fanatical far-right fascist settler community that has been terrorizing the Palestinian population of Hebron, or Al-Khalil as it's historically known, for years. And you're not going to mention that? Yeah, why would Bad Benada ever possibly have any idea that any reason to believe that you're being racist, aristocracy? How could anyone get the idea that you are an apologist for this shit?
Done to Palestinians, right? I shouldn't use the term Palestinian because in reality, Jews are Palestinians at the time as well. Right?
No. There were Palestinian Jews. They were actually the targets of fucking terrorist attacks by Zionists because they opposed Zionist colonization too. The entire Palestinian community didn't like what was going on. It was not a religious thing. It wasn't just Palestinian Muslims or Palestinian Christians. Palestinian Jews also didn't like it.
right? So actually, I'll just start saying Arabs. And it was done to Arab Muslim. So there are just regular conflicts. And so Vox is being honest here when they say that there's a lot. You'd probably have to really calculate it mathematically on who did it more. But
well, people have done that.
it's kind of like nickel and diming.
In response, Jewish militias formed to fight both the local Arabs and to resist British rule. Then came
To fight the local Arabs. Like, I mean, which is to say they formed colonial paramilitaries. And the thing is that when they talk about the local Arabs, they're specifically also talking about the local Arab Jews.
the Holocaust, leading many more Jews to flee Europe for British Palestine.
Okay. They kind of skipped over this, but what starts to happen is, remember I told you guys that nationalism is a huge aspect? So in 1919, after World War I, when they cut up the Middle East and divided between empires, this was a normal thing that had been done over the past 100 years.
Well, yes, it's called imperialism. Millions of people have been killed by it. Yes, it's normal, but I mean, it sounds like you're gonna just suggest that it's also okay. Yeah, I mean, they're literally ethnically cleansing a Palestinian town right now. In a Palestinian town within the Green Line, no less.
During European colonialism. They have wars, right? And they divide it up. And this is how you see, these arbitrary lines in, Iraq and etc., right? You know, the French get this section and and they don't really care about where it's useful to have these borders. But
well, they care about where it's useful to them to have these borders. They don't give a shit about the indigenous communities.
1919 is a little different because now there's this huge new nationalism movement that's really becoming strong.
And the huge new nationalism movement, nationalism was not new in 1919. Jesus, did she... I mean, how the fuck did she ever, picked up a history book ever? Okay, and with that, this is where we're gonna leave off for tonight. It is almost 2:45, but I will be back tomorrow night, most likely. Yeah, I mean, Israel is doing this inside and outside the Green Line constantly. I mean, the Nakba never ended in any meaningful sense. Yeah, exactly, and they've never stopped. Alas, this stream must, because I have to do washing up and shit. So I will bid you good night. We will be back tomorrow. Back to our normal schedule, because I will have to avoid waking people up again. But thank you, Rika, welcome. I hope to see you again tomorrow. And we'll be back tomorrow evening at about 11:30, going till about 1, the usual way. Have a very good night.